everyone, it's Alice, and today we are going to talk about some fantasy adventure books. So you may know that I love adventure books, and I've realized that a pretty sizable portion of the ones that I've read that I really like have fantasy elements to them. I do really like straight up adventure as well, but I find those a little bit more difficult to find, but it is a little bit easier to find it when it's like blended with fantasy, and I love that. And so today I thought I would share with you my favorites, and then I also have a little TBR at the end. Now, the kinds of fantasy adventure books that I like are usually for adults, although I have a couple that are more like YA middle grade, and most of them don't lean too much into like high fantasy with the exception of a couple. I also like when they have a little bit of humor to them, maybe a little bit of coziness, and I think generally I like dark stories, but with these kinds of books, most of them are not like super dark. That's just what I like, and I know that there are loads of different kinds of fantasy adventure books, but when I'm looking for these books, what I look for is like, I want them to be fun, maybe have a little bit of coziness to them, I want them to make me chuckle a little bit, and I just want it to be magical and whimsical and just a good time. Anyways, let's just get into it, starting with a book that I read this year and I absolutely loved, and it's kind of the book that sparked the idea for this video. It's Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This follows a princess turned nun who, after having spent like a decade in a convent living a very sheltered life, she decides that she's gonna save her sister from the horrible prince that she's married to. So she goes on this quest, and with her is this witch with powers over the dead who also happens to have a sort of chicken as a pet, but this chicken is possessed by a demon. She's also joined by a fairy godmother, a knight/criminal, and they go on this quest to save her sister. And there's also a dog made of bones, because of course there is. This is a story that feels like a dark fairy tale, and it's full of whimsy and quirky characters that I loved following. There's also a lot of humor in this book. It has a very particular tone to it that I thought was really funny, and it's great to get to explore this world with these characters as they go off on this quest and try to figure it out as they go along. It's the perfect mix of like magic and adventure, and it's just a super fun book. I do kind of see that it might not be for everyone because it is quite particular, but I loved it. The second one I have also has some fairy tale whimsical vibes to it. It's Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. This follows a scholar who goes on a sort of research trip because she's working on this encyclopedia of fae and fairy lore, and she goes to this little town, but because she's not great with people, she immediately just sort of offends everyone in the town. But soon, luckily or unluckily, depending on who you ask, she is joined by her friend/scholarly rival who just shows up unannounced and uninvited, but he is very charming, so he sort of helps her with the town people, and together they sort of explore the world of the hidden ones, which is like fairies and fae in this world. This is a book filled with magic, and I loved following the characters in here and seeing their friendship sort of flourish, and again, this has some humor to it that will make you chuckle. I also love the world this is set in and getting to see like the fairy realm and all of that. And I feel like one of the things that really did it for me in this book is that it is kind of cozy, but it also has some darker elements to it, which makes it feel like sometimes you are a little bit worried about what's going on. So it feels not like super high stakes, but a little bit like you might worry a little bit. And it's just a perfect blend of like coziness, a little bit of darkness, and just a lot of fun. Then we have just a straight up cozy one. It's Garlic and the Vampire by Bree Paulsen. This is a graphic novel, and it follows this creature named Garlic who lives in a village of vegetable folk, and she's very anxious and quite nervous. And basically what happens is that a vampire moves into the neighborhood, and that sort of scares everyone, and they decide that someone needs to go confront the vampire. And because Garlic is garlic, she is asked to do that, and she does. This is a very sweet and charming story. It's beautifully illustrated. It has a very autumnal color palette, and this is one of those books that if you're having a bad day and you need something to cheer you up, this is the book to read, because there is no way that this wouldn't warm your heart a little bit, because it's just so cute. Moving on, obviously we need some pirates, so I have a couple of pirate books for you. The first one is The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels by India Holton, which is set in Victorian England. And we're following this young woman who is a thief, and she basically has to save her aunt from this crazy pirate. She's a part of a society of lady thieves, and she's at that point in her career where like someone is sending an assassin after her, and she has to dodge him, but he's also kind of like funny, he's not taking it too seriously. And basically she goes on this adventure to save her aunt, but also to sort of find herself. There is a little bit of romance in this one as well, and a little bit of steam, if you're into that. This is a ridiculous book, but in the best possible way. And I feel like if you read the first like 30 pages of this and you don't like it, you're not gonna like it. But if you do, that's what it's like the whole way through. It has a very fun and like funny tone to it, and it really takes things quite far. We have adventure in here, flying houses, magic, obviously this sort of secret society, there's pirates, and like I mentioned, a little bit of romance, and it's just so much fun. And all of this is blended together with a lot of humor, and a lot of the humor is sort of based around how ridiculous the Victorian society was in parts, and it's a lot of fun. It's a complete romp. The other pirate book I have has slightly more conventional pirates, kind of. It's The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty. And this follows a retired female pirate. She's been out of the game for a decade, but then someone comes to her with this mission, and also is offering her a lot of money to do this thing. She basically is told to go find someone, and she takes up on it, even though she's a little bit worried that maybe it's not as great as it seems. And of course it isn't. But she goes on this adventure, and it takes her to places she didn't even know existed. This is one of my top 3 favorite adventure books, period. Like, it's one of my favorite books that I've read, and I can't think of a single thing that I would really change about this book. Like, it can't be anything else than what it is to make it better. We have amazing characters in here, especially the main character. She's so much fun to follow. And we have magic, adventure, demons, and obviously loads and loads of pirates, and it's just so much fun. But I think the thing that really does it for me in this is that even though we have a lot of this action, we have characters that have a lot of layers to them, you care about them, and there are a lot of interesting things going on in here that sort of make you think, and the characters just feel like real people, and it really sucks you in. It's magical and wonderful and just absolutely perfect, and I love it. Then we have a middle grade book, actually, which I adore. It's The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making by Catherynne and Valente. This follows a 12-year-old girl named September who one day in her kitchen is visited by this wind. And this wind wants to take her to Fairyland and basically tells her that she is needed there because there's this new Marquess who is terrorizing everyone, and September is the only one who can retrieve this talisman that will basically solve all of their problems. This is a super sweet and fun book, again filled with quirky characters and also a lot of magical creatures like this wyvern, and it's just very sweet, and it's so much fun to go on this adventure through Fairyland and getting to meet all of these different people and creatures and seeing all of these different places. It's just a very solid like adventure. Although this is geared towards a younger audience, I do feel like it's one of those books where even if you're an adult, you could still really enjoy it because it's just charming and fun. It's also illustrated, which adds another layer to it, and it's just very sweet, and it follows a very clever and fun main character who just is trying to go on this adventure even though she's 12. While we're on the slightly cozier side of things, I also just wanted to mention Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, which maybe is a little bit of a stretch calling this an adventure because it's not like a quest type adventure where you go all of these different places, but it's more of a following your dreams kind of adventure, and it follows a main character who has spent her life being an adventurer. And I just feel like the vibe really fits with a lot of these other books, so I'm just including it anyway, even though it maybe doesn't entirely fit. The story follows an orc who is retiring from her violent and adventurous life, and she's settling down in this little town where she wants to open up a coffee shop. But in this town, no one knows what coffee is, but she's discovered it on her adventures and she loves it and wants to bring it to the people. So she builds and opens up this coffee shop and she's joined by some new friends. Eventually there's a little ratkin baker in there who bakes cinnamon buns, and I'm obsessed with this little creature. It's so sweet. And it's just a really fun, light, magical book that feels like a warm hug, and it's just so sweet. Next, we have a little bit of a different kind of adventure. It's The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherynne Arden. This is one of my favorite wintry books. It's so lovely. It follows this young girl who lives in a small village, and she is able to see these spirits or these creatures that like live all over. Like there's a spirit of the house, the fire, the barn, and all of these different creatures, and they offer protection for the people, and if you leave them offerings they will like protect you from certain things. And she's the only one who can see them, but it is custom in this village to leave offerings even though other people can't see them. But then the girl's father marries a new woman, and she is super religious and she doesn't want anyone to do these things anymore. And so most people stop doing it and these spirits start dying. And because of that, this old evil in like the wintry forest wakes up and wants to take advantage. This is a magical, wonderful story that's a little bit dark sometimes, and sometimes it feels quite high stakes, but I loved following this main character as she's like the only one who can do anything about what's happening, and she sees a lot of different parts of the forest and stuff that she's never been to before. I'm trying not to give it away, and she meets creatures that she's only heard of in legend. And it's super atmospheric. I love the setting of this. Like I mentioned, it's super wintry, and it's just a lovely, magical book, and it has some real like folklore vibes to it. Then we have a book that I don't actually have a physical copy of because I borrowed it from a friend, but it is Mort by Terry Pratchett. And this is a book where we follow a boy who becomes the apprentice of death, and that involves a lot of going around and doing things. And I don't really want to give too much away. I kind of went into this only knowing that it was about a character who became an apprentice to death. And I feel like knowing that was enough, and just going into it with no more information than that was fantastic. This is a really fun book though, and there's a lot of humor in here that I absolutely loved. And I loved seeing this world it's set in. It's a really fun book about death, and it's just magical. The next two that I have sort of lean a little bit more into that high fantasy vibe. We have A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab, which is set in a world where there are all of these parallel Londons. We have Grey London, Red London, White London, and Black London, but no one goes to Black London anymore because it was sealed off after this disaster. We are following a main character who has the ability to travel between Londons, which is really rare, and because of that he works as a sort of diplomat for Red London, and he travels between, he sort of works for the royal family in Red London. And on the side, he has this thing that gets him in trouble because he's kind of like a smuggler, and he takes things from different Londons to other Londons, which is illegal. But he does it, and doing that gets him into trouble when he transports something that he really shouldn't have. The world in here is really cool. I loved all of the magic and just getting to see the different Londons and traveling between was a lot of fun. It's a really interesting concept for a world. And eventually our main character that I mentioned is sort of, he's joined by another main character that we're also kind of following, who's from another London, and eventually they end up going on this adventure together to sort of solve the trouble that this guy is in. The other one that I have that is definitely high fantasy is a book that I read years ago, but it remains one of my favorite fantasy books that I've read. It's The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This is a really difficult book to summarize, but it basically is telling the story of this infamous wizard who lived in this world, and he's kind of like chronicling his life, but I guess this is the first book in a trilogy, so it's only a part of his life that he's chronicling, and he goes on a lot of adventures. I really should reread this. I have been putting it off, waiting for the third book. I was like thinking, when the third book comes out, I'll reread the first and the second, but now it's been like, I think over a decade that I've been waiting for the third book, and I know a lot of people are waiting for that book, and it doesn't appear like we're getting it anytime soon, if at all, to be honest, so I really should just reread this. I remember absolutely loving the world in here. I remember loving the characters. It's just a beautifully crafted book and a beautifully crafted fantasy world, and it's just so much fun. It's a little dark, but there's also a lot of adventure in it, and it's just amazing. Lastly, before we move on to my TBR, I just want to quickly mention two classics. The first one is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. This is basically adventure on acid, and it tells the story of Alice who falls down a rabbit hole and goes into this amazing place called Wonderland, and she goes on an adventure down there. And this is a truly insane book. Like, it's so crazy, but it's also super creative and so much fun. My edition also has the original, like, drawings, which is amazing, and yeah, it's a really fun adventure book, but it's bonkers. The last one that I have to mention is, of course, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis, which tells the story of Narnia, which is this place that these four siblings find beyond a wardrobe door, and they're basically called to help free Narnia from the enchantment of the White Witch. Most people know of this book, so I'm not going to talk about it too much, but it's filled with adventure and magic, and it's really good. Then we're going to do a little TBR at the end here. Several of these books are sequels to books that I've mentioned, and then I have a couple of others. I will say, the kinds of fantasy adventure that I like reading, I do find a little bit difficult to find sometimes. Like Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, the first book that I mentioned, I didn't realize that was adventure until I read it. So sometimes it's hard to like find these books because they're marketed as kind of something else. So if you have any recommendations based on my favorites, please let me know, because I'm always looking for more of these kinds of books to read because I love them. Anyways, first in my TBR stack we have The Lies of Loch Lamora by Scott Lynch. This is set on an island where I think the whole island is a city, and we are following a main character who's the leader of this group of thieves who call themselves the Gentlemen Bastards, and he's like nearing infamy, but then I think someone stages a coup and he is having none of it. This has been on my TBR for a while, and I'm super excited about it. It's one of those books that I'm pretty sure I'm gonna love, but I also am saving it a little bit. It's one of those books that I'm saving for a rainy day when I need it. It is also a little bit chunky, so I need like proper time to read it, but yeah, I really think I'm gonna love this one. The second one that I have is a book that just came out. It's Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett, and this is obviously the sequel to the Encyclopaedia of Fairies. I think we're just following the same main characters in here, but this time the main character wants to make a map of this Fae world that she's written an encyclopedia about, which I'm sure will take them on a lot of adventures. Then we have a middle grade book. It's The Ship of Shadows by Maria Kuzniar, and this is a gorgeous book. It has like a cutout on the cover, which I really like. And the story is, again, about pirates. It's about this young girl who is spending her days in her family's dusty tavern, and she's dreaming of adventure, but she's told that girls can't be explorers. But then one day this ship, I think, docks in wherever she's living, and it's a ship that is infamous for having an entirely female crew, and she sees her opportunity to follow her dreams. It sounds like a lot of fun. It is middle grade, so it's quite young, obviously, but yeah, it looks and sounds really good. Second to last, we have another sequel. It's A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. This follows the events of the first book, obviously. I don't really know what goes on in this book, but I think there's like these magical games. It's like an international competition that take place in this book, and again, there's mention of pirates. So I'm excited. I'm also excited to see more of this world because I really liked what we saw of the world in the first book. Lastly, we have The League of Gentlewomen Witches by Indy Holton, which is in the same series as the Wisteria Society, but I think it's only set in the same world. We're not following the same characters. In this one, we're following a league of witches, and one of them has to, like, I think, find and protect this amulet that is like super powerful, and they don't want it to get into the wrong hands, but someone else wants it for their own dark intentions. I'm sure it's gonna be as much fun as the first book, only with witches. That was the last book I had to show you today though, which means it's time to wrap this up. Now, I'd love to know what your favorite fantasy adventure books are. Please leave it in the comments below so that both me and everyone else can get even more recommendations. That's one of my favorite things about making these kinds of videos, because I always get so many like books I've never heard of in the comments, and it's so much fun. It's not great for my ever-growing TBR, but whatever. I still feel like it's mostly a positive thing. As always though, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!